President Feroz Rasool, Dr. Athar Inam, Dean Adil Haider, and Hamad. It is my pleasure to be here, and I want to thank you, Athar, for your gracious comments about me. And I'm honored for this invitation to speak as the keynote lecturer. It is a single honor for me to deliver the oration in memory of Ibn Sina, whose statue here is right in front of the University of Bukhara in Uzbekistan. My presentation this afternoon is about Jerusalem, and to place the sacred city and the illustrious scholar in perspective, in the year 1025, when Qanun fil Tib, the masterpiece book by Ibn Sina, was released, Jerusalem was under control of the Fatimids who were in Egypt. The Fatimids that year had destroyed the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which upset the Christians around the world, and they were preparing for the First Crusade. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So let me give you the story of Jerusalem right from the beginning. 4,000 years ago, लाइट थोड़ी सी और कम कर सकते हैं, ज़्यादा अच्छा नजर आएगा वो. 4,000 years ago, a severe drought and famine descended on Mesopotamia, which is now called Iraq. According to the book of Genesis, the Lord said to Ibrahim, "Go from your native land and from your father's house to the land that I will show you." In search of food and water, Hazrat Ibrahim led the tribe of Israelites, whom we call Bani Israel, from the city of Ur, and they headed west and reached Canaan. The Jews claim that this was the land promised to them by the Lord. The biblical land of Canaan lies between the Mediterranean Sea and the river Jordan. Hazrat Ibrahim settled in this land, and it was here that the Lord asked him to sacrifice his most beloved possession. Ibrahim offered his son and took him to a hill called Mount Moriah. The hill was in a town now called Jerusalem, and several centuries later, on this very hill, Hazrat Suleiman will build his temple, and several centuries after that, our Prophet Muhammad would experience Miraj and begin the night journey from this very hill. These three events have consecrated Jerusalem for all times to come. Hazrat Ibrahim and his family are buried in the tomb of patriarchs in the town of Hebron, which is about like 30 miles from Jerusalem. To enter the tomb, Muslims have to prove their religious identity by reciting Surah Fatiha or Surah Akhlas. The tomb of the patriarchs is divided into a Muslim section, which is a mosque, and a Jewish section, which is a synagogue. Hazrat Ibrahim is buried in a cave below, and to see his tomb, you have to look down a shaft. Right here. You have to look down and you can see a candlelight which marks his grave. On the Muslim side are also buried Bibi Sarah and Hazrat Ishaq. On the synagogue side are Hazrat Yaqub and his son Yusuf. Muslims are never allowed in the Jewish section, and the Jews are allowed in the Muslim side only for the 3 days of Passover and Easter. 200 years after Prophet Ibrahim settled in Canaan, the place was hit by famine and drought, and the Israelites were again on the move in search of food. This time they headed for the rich Nile Valley, where they were forced into bondage and were reduced to servitude and slavery by the pharaohs. The emancipation of the Israelites came from within the palaces, and Moses said to Pharaoh Ramses, "Let my people go." And then he led them through the Sea of Reeds and came to Wadi Musa, which is in Jordan. This was the Exodus, a defining moment in the history of the Jews, just as Hijrat is for the Muslims. The Jews celebrate the emancipation as Passover in this season of Easter. Moses and his followers wandered for 40 years in Wadi Musa in search of the promised land. They rested in a small oasis town, and here Moses instructs his brother Harun to look after his tribe, and he takes leave to seek divine guidance. The place where Moses leaves his brother is Mount Jabal Harun, which you can reach either with a four-wheeler or you can go up on a camel. Moses experiences Epiphany on Mount Tur in Sinai, where Allah speaks to him and gives him the commandments which Moses takes down to his people. When Moses returns to Jabal Harun, he is shocked. The Bani Israel had taken up a golden calf for worship. Moses threatens them and threatens to leave them, but after they repent, he gives them the commandments. The Israelites place the divine tablets in a book, in a box, and call it the Ark of Covenant, a covenant between the Jews and the Lord, which they claim gave them the status of a chosen people. Moses leads his people towards the promised land. The journey takes them through the settlements of Ad and Thamud, who were the followers of Hazrat Saleh, and they hewed homes into the mountains. The ancient settlement is Petra. Moses finally reached Mount Nebo, from where he could see the promised land. And this was across the river Jordan. And if you visit the place on a clear night, you can see the lights of Jerusalem and the lights of Jericho. In the year 2000, Pope John Paul II came here and stood in the footsteps of Moses looking at Canaan. Moses died before he could lead his people into Canaan, and his burial site is not known. Joshua led his people into Canaan, and he conquers them mercilessly, killing the tribes along with the women and children. Among Bani Israel was born Hazrat Dawood. David defended his people against the Philistines and killed Goliath with a slingshot. And ultimately, he becomes the king of all the tribes of the region. David conquers the prized city of Jerusalem, and he wants to build a temple here for the Ark of the Covenant. And for the place, he selects Mount Moriah. And here in this exquisite painting, you can see David taking the ark to the city of Jerusalem. But the Lord says to him, David, thou shalt not build this temple because your hands are full of blood. And this was the reference to his killing the husband of Bathsheba, the woman David loved. The first temple of the Israelites was eventually made by David's son, Hazrat Suleiman. And it is believed that he stood as the jinns under his command completed the palaces and the temple. Finally, Solomon placed the ark in the most sacred place in the temple. King Solomon lived in style and exuberance, and to his palace came Queen of Sheba on her throne, which was carried by the jinns. 400 years after the temple was built, catastrophe visits the Israelites. The neighboring Babylonians destroy the temple, and the Israelis were devastated, just as we Muslims would be if our Khane Kaaba was damaged. The Babylonians captured the learned and the talented Israelites and took them to Babylon. And those who could flee the area, they left. And this was the genesis of the first diaspora of the Jews. In diaspora, the pious and the learned defined the religion Judaism. And the Israelites from this point on would be addressed and called as Jews. After 50 years of diaspora, the Jews were emancipated, and this time by the Persian Emperor Cyrus. Cyrus gave them gold and silver and told the Jews to go back to Jerusalem and rebuild the damaged temple. The Persians helped build the second temple, and the Old Testament speaks of Cyrus with grace and honor. So it is interesting that today Israel considers Iranians, once their benefactors, as the worst enemy. The turbulent history of the Jews continued under the Romans, who appointed Herod as the governor. And Herod tried to placate the Jews who were protesting the presence in the city. He even built the temple, but they were not to be placated. In the year 67, Roman General Titus was given orders to settle the uprising once and forever. Titus destroyed the second temple of Solomon and looted away all the relics of Jews to Rome. The temple would never be built again. Today, only the wall built by Herod survives. And this is the sacred wall called the Wailing Wall, against which the Jews wail, recalling their sufferings. The Wailing Wall area and all the synagogues in the country are open for all religions to visit and people to visit. And the worshippers write the prayers and place them between the stones, just as we do in the dargahs and in our mazars. Very near the wall is the tomb of Hazrat Dawood. In the year 3 of the Common Era, a child was born to Bibi Maryam in the town Bethlehem. To experience the plight of the Palestinians, we visited Bethlehem in a public bus. A distance of only 20 kilometers, it took us 2 hours to get there. And the bus was boarded 4 times by Israeli securities who kept checking the papers of the Arabs. We were obviously foreigners, so we were spared the indignities. Bethlehem, like all West Bank towers or towns, are enclosed by infamous wall, which is 40 feet tall, complete with watchtowers and razor wires. And the wall snakes for about 430 kilometers all around the Arab towns under the Israelis. The Church of the Nativity, where Jesus was born, resembles a medieval castle and does not have the grandeur of the Saint Basilica we see in Rome. The entrance to the church was once very large, and you could take horses and carriages through it. But to preserve the dignity of the place, the Ottomans reduced the size of the entrance. And if you wish to get into the church, you have to bend low. Hence, the new name for the entrance called the Gate of Humility. In the basement is the most sacred place where Jesus was born. A silver star marks the exact place of the birth, and the many lamps which you can see above the silver star are many denominations in the Christian church. Mary is afraid that Herod, who had announced that all infants born should be killed, takes Jesus and escapes to Egypt. They return to Jerusalem 30 years later, and they come on a Palm Wednesday. Jesus heals the sick and preaches his message at the temple, which infuriates the Jews who charge him with blasphemy. Jesus is now a marked man. He has his Last Supper next day, and in this famous fresco by Leonardo da Vinci in the Church of Santa Maria in Milan, but the room where the Last Supper was taken is preserved in Jerusalem. And in 2000, Pope Paul placed a brass tree in this room of the Last Supper. After the supper, Jesus escapes, hides in the Garden of Gethsemane, but he is arrested by the Jews and taken to the Roman judge who sentences him to crucifixion. On Friday, he's scourged and given a cross to carry it through the city to the hill of Golgotha for the crucifixion. The street on which Jesus walked to his crucifixion is called Via Dolorosa, which means the street of pain and suffering. This is Via Dolorosa today in Jerusalem. And then after the walk, Jesus finally arrives for the crucifixion, where he is crucified in the company of three well-known criminals. In the evening, the body is brought down from the cross and placed on this stone of unction, and then after that, placed in a cave behind it. 2 days later, on Easter Sunday, when the family came for the body, the cave was found to be empty. Jesus appears to Mary to reveal that he had risen. Christianity was born and destined to become the largest religion in the world. In the 4th century, the site of crucifixion was discovered by Roman Emperor Constantine, who had himself converted to Christianity. His mother, Helena, ordered a church to be built on the site, and the Crusaders named this later on as the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. In Jerusalem, every Friday at 4 p.m. exactly, pilgrims from around the world come to walk in the steps of Jesus, carrying the cross and stopping at every station to remember the Christ. For centuries, Christians and Jews lived together in an uneasy peace. At the time of the marriage of a prophet in 621, Jerusalem was in complete control of the Roman, and the Christian governor ordered all Jews to be baptized or leave the city. 8 years before Prophet Muhammad passed away, the Qibla was changed from Jerusalem to Mecca. In 638, 6 years after the passing away of our beloved Prophet, Umar ibn Khattab won the epic battle against the Romans and moved towards Jerusalem. Sophronius, who was the Christian patriarch of Jerusalem, realized the futility of facing such a massive Muslim army, and he sued for peace on one condition, that I will give the surrender of the city only if Hazrat Umar comes personally to take it. Hazrat Umar arrived on a camel at the Damascus gate to accept the surrender. It was a custom with Khalifa Umar to take turns with his servant when he was on a camel. When he reached the gates of Jerusalem, he was leading the camel and the servant was sitting on the camelback. His clothes were patched and there was an air of modesty about the Muslim Khalifa. The Christian patriarch was dressed in regal finery, and all the Christians who had come to witness the scene were surprised to see modesty and poverty embodied in the Muslim Khalifa when these values were so cherished in the Christian faith. Umar first wanted to pay homage to the place of our prophet's Miraj, but the patriarch asked him if he could visit the site of Jesus' crucifixion. Hazrat Umar agreed. While at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, it was time for the Zohar prayers. And Prophet Hazrat Umar asked the patriarch if he could say his prayers. And he said, well, why don't you say the prayers right in this church? Hazrat Umar said, if I do that, it'll give a message to my followers that they are free to occupy the Christian places. So he said, I would rather pray outside the church. He asked all his followers to stand in congregation, and then he asked Hazrat Bilal to give the azan. Hazrat Bilal demurred. He said, I have not given the azan since the time of the Prophet, and I'm not about to do that today. Hazrat Umar pleaded with him the importance of Jerusalem as a Qibla, and the Muslim prayers were being also offered in Jerusalem for the first time. When the sonorous voice of Hazrat Bilal rose over the city, it was an emotional scene. Everyone in the congregation, including Hazrat Umar, wept bitterly and inconsolably. The rock of a prophet's Miraj was a garbage dump, and Hazrat Umar cleaned it with his own hands. And then he asked where the Jews were. And when he found out there were no Jews, he asked the Jewish families to return to their homes. And then he ordered a mosque to be built, the first mosque of Islam to be built in Jerusalem. The act of Hazrat Umar inviting the Jews to come to Jerusalem has not been lost on the Jews. A large square in the Jewish section, not in the Muslim section, but the Jewish section of Jerusalem, is named after Hazrat Umar, but his memory is desecrated by the Zionist flag. The Umayyad dynasty, after the righteous caliphs, moved the capital from Medina to Damascus, and every caliph traveled to Jerusalem to take the oath of office. When the fifth Umayyad Caliph Abdul Malik came to Jerusalem, he saw that the Muslims were in awe of the Christian church and the celebrations which went on in it. So he decided to build an imposing monument in Jerusalem, which would be unmatched in beauty and in grandeur. He ordered the building of the Dome of the Rock, which 1300 years later is the most recognized icon of Muslims and Palestine. The dome is on a raised platform called the Temple Mount, because this is the place where the Solomon's temple was once before. The Dome of the Rock is not a masjid and doesn't even have a mihrab in it. Masjid-e-Aqsa would be built several decades later, and that will be built right behind the Dome of the Rock. And both of them together, the Dome of the Rock and the Masjid-e-Aqsa, are referred to as Haram Sharif. Non-Muslims cannot enter the dome, but can only come up to the steps accompanied by the guards. Of course, Muslims can go in, but they have to prove their religious identity. This is the ceiling of the Dome of the Rock. The dome has undergone renovations under every dynasty, and the Ottomans under Suleiman the Magnificent replaced the facade with tiles, and on it are inscribed Surah Yasin and Surah Akhlas. Below the dome is the cave in which we believe that our prophet led the past prophets in the congregational prayers. This is Masjid-e-Aqsa behind the dome, and this was built by Khalifa Abdul Walid in the same place where Hazrat Umar had built the first mosque for the Muslims. The interior of Masjid Aqsa is very simple, and the attendance is usually very thin. This is the 5-day congregation when we were there. Men pray in Masjid Aqsa, and the women pray in the Dome of the Rock. The reason the congregation is not rich is because of the walls around the Muslim cities, which prevent the Muslims from coming to the Masjid Aqsa to pray for the Friday prayers. I offered my nafil in the basement of Aqsa. One of the walls of the basement is the Wailing Wall. The Muslims pray this side of the wall, and the Jews wail on the other side of the Wailing Wall. And you can see here how close the two places of worship are. Muslims ruled over Jerusalem and the tomb of the Christ for 4 centuries. And in the 11th century, 2 events happened which unsettled the Christians of Europe. The controversial Fatimid Khalifa Hakim destroyed the Holy Sepulchre, and the Seljuks warrior Arp Asalan moved towards Jerusalem and on the way defeated the Byzantines. The Christians were very, very disturbed. The Byzantine Emperor Alexis appealed to the Christians in Europe to set aside the differences and come to the aid of Christianity. The First Crusade was about to be launched. This was the first and the only successful crusade of the 7 the Christians launched against the Muslims. And the blood of Muslims and the blood of Jews who defended the city for 40 days filled the streets knee deep. For almost a century after that, Jerusalem remained a Christian city, and the Crusaders converted the mosques into churches and destroyed the synagogues also. They hoisted a huge cross on the Dome of the Rock. They converted the basement of the Aqsa into a stable for their horses, and they converted the mihrab into a latrine. Thus, the Muslim shrines were desecrated, and the Jewish places fared no better. Even as the Crusaders held Jerusalem, Muslims fought with Muslims, and from this feuding class of Muslims rose a young soldier from Iraq, Salahuddin Ayyubi, who, after many impressive victories, was declared the Sultan of Egypt and the entire region. In 1187, Sultan Salahuddin won the critical battle against the Byzantines in the city of Hattin, and the road to Jerusalem lay open. Sultan Salahuddin reached the gates of Jerusalem on 3 days before 27 Rajab, which was the anniversary of the Miraj. He asked his troops to wait and not enter the city until the auspicious day. The first khutbah after 100 years of Christian rule was given from this member in Jerusalem. Salahuddin honored the traditions of Hazrat Umar and asked Jewish families to return to the city of their faith. Among the Jews who returned was Maimonides, the eminent Jewish scholar and the doctor who had fled Spain at the persecution of the Muslim Almohads in the city of Cordoba, and that was in the 12th century. The name of Salahuddin is inscribed on the ceiling of the Dome of the Rock. And even for the Jews, Salahuddin was a savior. A major road across the old city is named after him, and it says Qaid Muslim Muharrir al-Quds, and it says the leader of the Muslims who liberated Jerusalem from the Crusaders in the year 1187. When I went to Jerusalem and they used to ask my name, I used to say in a very heavy Arab accent, my name is Iftikhar Salahuddin. And they would be very happy. Marhaba Salahuddin, we need you again in Jerusalem. So I felt very welcome. 6 years after the conquest of Jerusalem, Sultan Salahuddin lay dying in Damascus. And at the burial, it was found that the man who conquered so many cities did not have money saved even to buy clay for his grave. His mausoleum is in the courtyard of the Umayyad Mosque in Damascus. In 1917, the Ottoman Empire was divided between Britain and France. The French got Syria, and the Britain took Palestine. The French General Guéraud came to take the possession of Damascus, and the first thing he did was to visit the tomb of Salahuddin. He kept his leg on the grave and said, Salahuddin, we are back. This is the consecration of the cross over the crescent. The slave dynasty of Mamluks in Egypt occupied Jerusalem after the Ayyubids and brought about an architectural renaissance of the city. And two of the finest examples of Mamluk architecture are the Sabil built by Sultan Qaitbay and the Great Minar of Jerusalem. The golden period of Mamluks continued for almost 3 centuries, and the end came in the 16th century when Ottoman Sultan Salim, who was one of the 36 sultans who would rule Jerusalem, occupied the city. And the empire would be ruled by the Muslim Ottomans. But it was the legendary Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent who made the Damascus Gate and the changes on the Dome of the Rock. When Jerusalem was under the Ottomans, Zionism took root in Europe, and in 1917, Lord Balfour declared the British intention of giving the land to the Jews. And after that declaration, the exodus of the Jews started from Europe towards Jerusalem. In December 1917, General Allenby of England occupied Jerusalem as a Christmas gift for the people of Britain. Bells of Westminster Abbey tolled joyously. Jerusalem, after 700 years, was again in the hands of the Christians, and this time permanently. The Palestinians fought back, but the Jews were backed by the superpowers, and ultimately in 1948, Israel was created on the usurped Arab lands. Despite the defeat, the Arabs did not unite, and in a false sense of bravado, threatened to push Israel into the sea. In 1967, the Israelis launched a blistering attack against the Arabs, and within 6 days, took over the entire Palestine. Jerusalem, for which Muslims and Jews fought together for 40 days, was lost in only 6 days. Jericho, Hebron, Gaza, which were all under the Muslim rule for centuries, were lost to the Jews in matter of days. The Palestinian land is shrinking, and what precious land they are left with, the Jews settlers chisel it away and establish their own settlements. The rabbis and the Jews walk the streets of Jerusalem arrogantly, and they are watched by the Israeli Defense Forces. The Israeli brutality seems never ending. This innocent child is so petrified that she voids in her pants. Despite international protests, there is no let up in the atrocities. The anguished cries of the oppressed reach the skies, but the wind blows away the words. Thank you.